MusicXML topics. And we have all sorts of fancy equipment here, so make sure that I'm coordinated enough to actually click in one hand and hold the microphone in the other. I think it's working. So our agenda today, I see nearly everybody here is already quite familiar with MusicXML, so I will go very quickly over the introduction to MusicXML, put in there to make sure that folks understand where MusicXML has been in order to understand where we're going. The report on community progress from the past year. We've had a banner year in terms of new applications for MusicXML, so that's very exciting. Then Daniel will be doing a presentation on an update on what is new with the standard music font layout SMUFL project and its implications for MusicXML, which I'll also be discussing. And then we will be discussing possible future directions for MusicXML, both in content and governance. How does MusicXML evolve in the future? With MusicXML 3.0, we really have solved a lot of the initial use cases that MusicXML was designed for. But of course, once you solve one set of problems, whole new sets of problems emerge that can be very useful for making music work better for people, both on the musician perspective and the software developer and publisher perspectives. So Joe will be leading a presentation on that, and we're going to really try to keep, we're not going to try, there is no try. We are going to keep on time to make sure that we have plenty of time for a focused discussion on the end on the community's point of view of future directions for MusicXML. And then afterwards, at 4 o'clock, we will have a reception sponsored by Hal Leonard and Noteflight. Larry Morton may be joining us later. I don't see him in the room now, but Joe and Larry will be attending, and we thank them very much for sponsoring the meeting. The roles of the sponsors are very important to the success of the gatherings because everybody, of course, comes for the food and the drink afterwards. And we wouldn't have quite such the crowd without the receptions. We're very thankful to all the sponsors we've had, and Hal Leonard and Noteflight this year. So what is MusicXML? The standard open format for exchanging digital sheet music between applications. Exchange was really the primary application for MusicXML, exchange and archiving. I invented this back 15 years ago now. Started my own company, Recordare, for MusicXML work. But after that initial, MusicXML 0.1 that I was doing on my own, it got presented out into the community. And since then, it's been developed iteratively by a community of you and many other, literally hundreds of musicians and software developers over the past 15 years. And so many of the best ideas in MusicXML over the years have come from people in the community, not from me. It's available under an open and royalty-free license that is friendly for both open source and proprietary software, as evidenced by being MusicXML supported by almost 200 applications worldwide. MusicXML is, of course, a notation format rather than an audio format. It has the semantics of music notation and also details about how the score looks, how it plays back, which you can either use or ignore as you want, and applications can also and which information is relevant to them. A sequencer application may not, or a DAW application may not be so interested in saving the graphic appearance, but is very interested in the semantics. And different applications are interested in different parts of music representation. They can save what they need. Applications that read can read what they need. It's also an archival format. So, first of all, MusicXML being an XML format has all the advantages for stability of being able to be opened by any text editor. It's all internationalized in Unicode. The files are both human and machine readable. They can be used by any XML tools developed in industries way beyond our small part of the music industry. Backward compatibility is very important. All valid MusicXML 1.0 files are still valid MusicXML 3.0 files. People have made a lot of investment in MusicXML software over the years, and that investment is preserved with each succeeding version of MusicXML. The MusicXML license allows continued development of the format by anyone, not just Make Music. If Make Music disappeared from the face of the earth tomorrow, which given the state of the notation industry, one never knows these days, every single player, major player time in our business, but the license was designed so that anybody can go forward and develop MusicXML, and it's not, although the IP resides with Make Music, it is not under Make Music control. And again, already implemented by nearly 200 applications. Many years ago, you used to be able to read this chart. Now it's an eye chart that is mostly there to indicate just how many applications are supporting MusicXML, and it's much easier to list the applications that are mass market that do not support MusicXML than it is to list the ones that do, because that list is basically 2 applications now, which is Pro Tools on the DAW side and Band-in-a-Box for auto accompaniment. And most everybody else with large market share is on this list either as a product that is currently shipping or something that is a beta prototype software. So to get that exchange goal going again, we really have succeeded with that with MusicXML 3.0. I forgot to mention earlier that if there are any questions as any of us go through the presentations, feel free to ask. We can send microphones around or talk loudly, and we'll get the discussion going. MusicXML score publishing. MusicXML tends to be the conduit for how music gets from the composition applications such as Finale and Sibelius to the new wave of musician and consuming applications. However, there is no digital rights management built into MusicXML. The Open Score Format project from 8 years ago added digital rights management on top of MusicXML 2.0, but that's basically only been used by the Notestar application and hasn't been picked up widely by other applications. But with the lack of digital rights management, what you see is that MusicXML is a business-to-business format rather than a business-to-consumer format in terms of music publishing. The publishers may license MusicXML files to you as a service provider or a software developer, but it's then your responsibility to convert that into a protected format that the publisher is comfortable licensing to you, so that we don't have a fully editable version of the copyrighted music being distributed directly to the consumers. So what you see, therefore, for most sites that have MusicXML files is that this is public domain scores. We keep a list that we know about on our website. If you have a site or you know of other sites that have scores, please let us know. There are some of these sites that do include, there are publishers who do produce copyrighted editions in MusicXML or Finale or Sibelius files, so there are some of those as well. But the majority of music in MusicXML or formats that you could export MusicXML from do tend to be public domain music at this point. So what's new with MusicXML over the past year since the last time we met here at MusicMesse? And the main thing is the continued health of the market and the growth of the applications. We had been at a point where we were getting about 4 or 5 new applications, I think, a year supporting MusicXML. This year went crazy where there were 25 new applications since last year's MusicMesse that support the MusicXML format, either reading or writing or both. And there are 4 more applications that were in beta last year that have since launched. And I'm not going to be able to go around the room, and introduce every single application. That would take a long time. But as I list the applications, I'll ask people to stand up, and you can see who some of the folks are with the new applications. Find them afterward at the reception. At this time last year, we had just launched the MusicXML forum to replace our MusicXML mailing list, and we got 12 years of archives of the MusicXML forum up onto the web, so it's all in a searchable format. Since then, the discussion really seems to have gotten going. It seems to be a reasonable level, the same basic level of activity that we had on the MusicXML mailing list for years when MusicXML wasn't under active development. We've always had like a 2-year or so cycle in MusicXML development after we release. There's a period of time while people are figuring out how to use the new features before we dive into the next version. And the activity on the forum seems to be similar to that on the mailing list. We now have the Atom feed going, and forum and topic subscriptions are in place for people who want to have the forum pushed to you rather than have to remember to go out to the forum. If If you have any questions about that, feel free to send me an email. I'll get back to you after I get back to the USA on how that works. But the big thing has been to explore new possibilities for MusicXML 4.0. We haven't done development or design work on that, really waiting for this community meeting to get a better sense of a face-to-face discussion of future directions for MusicXML before embarking on MusicXML 4.0 work. The key topics are the Smoofle evolution for more use cases, so Daniel's presentation on Smoofle, Joe's evolution for more use cases and possibilities for change of governance. So we have lots of new readers and writers. If anybody here is from one of these applications, stand up and wave and let people know. I know there's at least one person here on one of these lists of applications. So we have lots more writers. We have about a dozen more applications that are writing MusicXML. And we have another 8 or so that are reading MusicXML applications. And 4 applications that were in beta last year that have since launched. So congratulations to everybody who has a new product out on the market, or new products that are adding MusicXML support, getting out of beta into production, new versions of products that are adding this functionality. It's really great to see the continual increase in applications, all sorts of innovative applications that are doing cool new things with MusicXML. And the overall increase in quality of MusicXML Exchange as applications iterate. So MusicXML and music fonts. MusicXML provides this standard interchange format for semantics, layout, and performance, but when you go back and forth between applications, fonts have complicated things. If I have a MusicXML element and I know what font I want, how do I know which code point is associated with any particular MusicXML semantics? Or going the other way, if I have a code point in a particular font, how do I know what MusicXML element I should use? And basically there have been tables that have been specific to each font, and fonts are limited to 250 characters. It's been a big mess. What do MusicXML positioning attributes mean? What does baseline mean? We have baseline positioning in MusicXML. What does that mean for a music character? And basically, in each font, it could mean something different. And people have asked us to standardize that at the MusicXML level, but it's like, we could try, but nobody's going to implement that. It's going to be too hard to do. That's something that needs to be standardized at the font level. So there are all these problems, and then Daniel Spreadbury at Steinberg, they're starting to build, when they were starting to build their new notation application, of course, ran into all these problems. And Daniel was the one who stood up and said, I'm going to solve this problem. Brave man as he is. And he's done a fantastic job with the standard music font layout, the Smoofle project. And I'll hand it over to Daniel to present an update on, we had introduced Smoofle last year, and most people were here for that, but an update on where Smoofle is and its current status and progress.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, I wasn't able to be here last year due to travel problems, so but here I am this year to talk about Smoofle. So what is Smoofle? It's a means of mapping musical symbols onto code pointers. Extraordinarily technical and boring thing, but it is rather important because over the years, different music programs have all had their own formats for fonts in different technologies and in different ways of organizing the symbols, which means that if you, obviously with MusicXML, you can transfer the musical data, the semantic data, back and forth between programs very easily. But certain aspects of the appearance of the music, particularly those around what symbols are actually used and exactly what those symbols should look like, were rather harder to transfer because there was no agreement, no standardization about, for example, what characters should be in the font, what code point or what position in the font they should be at, and how those symbols should be scaled relative to one another and positioned relative to the origin, which is sort of x equals 0 and y equals 0. And should they be left of the origin, right of the origin, above, below, all these things. As Michael says, that was a big problem if you wanted to have a standardized means of exchanging that aspect of musical data between different programs. And as Michael also said, because we were starting a new program from scratch, we had to look at this and decide what we were going to do about it. And in the end, it just didn't seem like a good idea to tread the same path and follow the sort of de facto, if you like, standardization that was actually introduced way back in the 1980s by Adobe's very first music font, which was called Sonata, and from which pretty much all other music fonts for desktop music programs have basically followed. But things have changed a great deal since the 1980s. There's been Unicode, there's been OpenType, there's been web fonts and all sorts of other things. And really that method of working with these things and the absence of any guidelines about how you should actually do it meant that it was really time to do something about it. So Smoothful defines the mapping between a musical symbol and its position in a font. It also provides a set of guidelines for how the font should be set up, which is hopefully font technology agnostic in the event that OpenType, for example, goes away and is replaced by something else. It also provides metadata in a format called JSON, which is a bit like XML, but a bit lighter weight than XML, that provides all sorts of useful bits of information for applications that want to use these music fonts, such as, by how much should you shorten or lengthen a stem to make it match this note head just so, or by how much should you move this flag left or right to make it connect to a stem properly, and other things along those lines. And we've worked all that out, and again, we had a community that has grown up around it since it was introduced a couple of years ago. And we've also made it available under a license called the MIT license, which is basically, it's kind of an open source license. We at Steinberg retain the copyright in Smoothful, but anybody who wants to modify it, use it, can do so in any application of whatever licensing type they want. So what is actually in Smoothful at the moment? So at the moment there are 2,407 separate musical symbols, and we've included them, sort of separated them up into ranges that sort of describe broadly speaking, their purpose. So Smoothful kind of has a taxonomical benefit as well as giving you all these guidelines for how you should put the font together. And the ranges are designed such that if you don't need, for example, medieval Renaissance notation, there's defined ranges that you can just leave out. And it makes it very, very easy for you to figure out when you're putting together a font what symbols you should include and which ones you shouldn't include. When we actually started on Smoothful, the starting point that I took was not actually Sonata or any of the other existing music fonts, but actually the Unicode range of musical symbols, which was made by a chap called Perry Rowland, who was also the father of the MEI music representation standard as well, which he had got passed through the Unicode Consortium in the late 1990s, but which has not actually been really gained any traction at all. It's a pretty good start, but as you can tell by the fact that Smoothful has 10 times as many glyphs as the musical symbols range in Unicode, it wasn't really comprehensive enough. Smoothful also defines recommendations for, as I say, things like ligatures, stylistic alternates, things, if you wanted to take advantage of more advanced font features, then there are guidelines for how to do that. And finally, it also includes a pair of fonts, which are, one is for scoring applications like Sibelius or Finale or MuseScore and the like, and the other is for text-based applications, which is one of the things that I wasn't expecting to be working on when I started on it, but when I presented it at an academic conference in 2013, some of the folks who are working on long-form, critical works and papers and so on, who need to be able to put musical symbols in their text documents, suddenly got very excited. So I ended up also coming up with a set of different guidelines for how you should put together a font that uses the Smoothful mapping, but designed for use in a text-based application like a word processor or tech or InDesign or whatever it might be. So the reference font is a family called Bravura. That's some of Bravura's symbols at random there. And it is, as I say, it's the reference font for Smoothful. So it actually implements all of the guidelines that we have come up with so far, and all of the glyphs and all of the ranges. So it's quite a complete font. And it's released under the SIL Open Font License, which means that the font is free to use. You can bundle it with your program, you can embed it in your documents, you can create documents with it, you can do pretty much anything you like with it. You can also modify it and use it as the basis of your own font if you want to, which I thought was an important thing to be able to sort of hopefully kickstart some new development of derivative font from Bravura and then sell that on its own. Otherwise, you can do pretty much anything you want with it. So what is the current status of Smoofle? Version 1.0 came out in June of last year. Since then, we haven't really done a huge amount to it. There's been little bubbles from the community of things that people want to see included. So there have been a couple of minor releases since then, the most recent one being version 1.12, which came out a few months ago. I do still have a little backlog of suggestions, and they do come up from time to time from the community, but it's more or less stable. As far as its goal of sort of mapping out the symbols that are most commonly used in Western music, going back to kind of medieval times, it's relatively comprehensive. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, if you know differently. But for that reason, it's basically considered stable at this time. So since it's been released, Bravura has found its way into a number of different programs, which has been very gratifying for me. It's included with Musical 2.0, which was released a few weeks ago. Logic Pro supports it but doesn't currently ship it, but they say they will ship it soon. Soundslice, which is a very nice web-based guitar and notation viewer and sort of training teaching tool, uses Bravura for its notation. Verovio, which is for MEI, uses Bravura and also has other Smoofle compliant fonts too. And a new iOS app came out just a couple of weeks ago based on a famous percussion teacher's method books called Groove Freedom, which also ships Bravura. Looks great in all of these places, which is fantastic. And all of these applications, as a result, are Smoofle compliant to varying degrees because they have to know where in the font to get the data. There are also some new fonts that are following the Smoofle standard coming along as well now. A little while ago, early this year, Robert Hirschot released a new version in November, which is quite a famous font that was primarily for Finale, and which is now fully Smoofle compliant, which is fantastic. MuseScore includes a font based on Gonville called Hoopville, which is Smoofle compliant. Laurent Pugin, who did the work on Verovio, has created his own font called Leipzig, which is Smoofle compliant, and so on. Make Music are working on a Smoofle compliant version of Maestro, and so on and so forth. So where does Smoofle go from here? Well, one obvious place it can go, and hence why we're all here today, at least partly is why I'm here, is because it might make sense to integrate Smoofle with MusicXML in a future version, perhaps version 4, and Michael's going to talk about that. Also, I just want to make sure that people know about Smoofle. It's hopefully helpful. The folks who've used it so far seem to be finding it helpful as a way of kind of charting the waters of how to get these things to work together in terms of, registration of glyphs relative to all this horrible detail of how to make music look nice using fonts. And it is still very much an active development project. As I say, it's stable at the moment, but somebody could come to me tomorrow with something incredibly interesting and exciting that they think it should do, and hopefully we'll be well equipped to take it on. If you want to know more about Smoofle, you can ask me about it, or you can go to smoofle.org, www.smufl.org, where you can find out all about it. You can download the Smoofle specification, which includes all of the glyphs laid out in their charts, tells you the code points. There's about 30 or 40 pages of sort of specification about how the metadata works, how the glyph registration works, and so on. And of course, you can also download Bravura from there as well. That's it.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Yes, are there any questions for Daniel about Smoofle before we move on to the next element? I'll be talking a bit more about MusicXML and Smoofle as well. It's all perfectly clear. Okay, why is this going backwards when I press that button? It does. The orientation is. It's been a long week at MusicMesse. Sorry about that. So, what are the possibilities then for? Oh, before I get started on this, I forgot. We'd like to get a list of the people who are attending. So I'll send 2 of these lists around. So if you could just put your name and your organization, that would be great. And this will go into a report about the meeting. We'll put these presentations online on the MusicXML site, and we'll also create a report about the discussion. And this side, and if we run out of space, they gave us 2 more sheets of paper. We're in good shape here. So where could we go with MusicXML 4.0 and Spoofle? Spoofle addresses so many of the standardization issues that have troubled MusicXML developers. What does it mean to integrate MusicXML better with Spoofle? Does MusicXML add support for all 2,407 glyphs in Spoofle? That might make things a little bit complicated. We have an accidental element, for instance, that's an enumeration of, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 accidentals. Do we want to turn that into an enumeration of 300 accidentals? Might not be the best way forward, but maybe that is the way to go. If we don't decide to integrate all the glyphs into MusicXML, can we come up with some guidelines to determine which ones we should add and which ones to leave out? If we don't add everything as a separate MusicXML element, maybe perhaps we could add some escape methods to access particular Spoofle glyphs by their canonical name, not by their code point, but by their descriptive name within MusicXML as a sort of an escape mechanism. We have a lot of escape elements, these other hyphen elements, other dynamics, other articulation that are in MusicXML, but it's just free-form text, and that isn't quite so useful for Exchange. Maybe there's a way to leverage that to integrate with Spoofle without making too much complexity for the MusicXML as a whole. What should we do about standardization on areas such as font metadata? Should we just say, hey, baseline means the same thing as it does in Spoofle? How much should the MusicXML documentation reference Spoofle elements? I think it would be great to just say that, hey, the staccato element, that refers to this particular Spoofle glyph. That's what we need. This is what the symbol looks like. This is the meaning that we have in mind. I mean, staccato pretty much people know, but Slifer and some of the other things that are in MusicXML can be more unclear. Having a specific reference in the Spoofle mapping should help clarify what these different MusicXML elements mean and help to tighten the specification. So in order to know what we need to do, we need to know where we are. So I decided for this meeting I better figure out just how much of Spoofle 1.12 is supported in MusicXML 3.0. And I quickly determined that figuring out what supported means is a bit tricky because there's not always a one-to-one mapping between a MusicXML concept and a Spoofle concept. And in particular, glyphs that are intended mainly for music text font use may not line up exactly with MusicXML concepts because MusicXML was conceived from a point of view of notation applications for use in notation software. There are also certain sets of glyphs that in Spoofle make semantic or graphical distinctions that we don't capture in MusicXML 3.0, although some of the base semantics are there. For instance, in the mensural time signatures, there's semantics that are in common with Common Western music notation time signatures, but there's nothing in MusicXML that says, hey, you should use the mensural version of this time signature. And similarly for instance, symbols that have different shapes, whether they're above a note or below a note. For the marcato element, we do distinguish that in MusicXML, but for things like a snap pizzicato element, we do not, and perhaps we should do that. Those were counted as being partially supported within my count. So I, however, just bludgeoned along with, although these are somewhat fuzzy numbers, I think they're useful. So here are some preliminary counts of where we are with Spoofle and MusicXML 3.0. And by my calculation, we support 839 of the glyphs, so that's 35% for fully supporting what's it. There's a clear one-to-one mapping. We're not losing semantics or anything for a particular Spoofle glyph. There's partial support for another 254 glyphs, so that brings us up to 46% altogether. So that's the things like the, for instance, Renaissance time signatures. The largest areas of non-support are, for instance, in extended accidentals. There are 11 ranges of accidentals in Spoofle that MusicXML doesn't cover at all, and that is 14% of Spoofle with 348 glyphs. And also MusicXML focuses on Common Western music notation. Spoofle takes a broader view and covers Western music notation back to much earlier times, and so the things that are pre-Common Western music notation are another 11 ranges that aren't supported at all, and that makes up 217 glyphs, 9% of SMUFL. The rest of the things that are missing are either less common symbols in various ranges, or most of the symbols in some of the other ranges like multi-segment lines, which I think would be a great thing to get into MusicXML, because in the past, different types of lines, repeating lines, have been something that you do as a shape, and the only way you could get that in would be, if you had some sort of EPS graphic, that would be the only way to share it in MusicXML. But wouldn't it be good to have some of these repeating lines be able to be represented semantically like they are in SMUFL, get that also into MusicXML, and it would be a whole new feature of MusicXML based upon some of the ranges that are there in the fonts. And they become much more practical to do because we have a font standard. The tools that we have shape, we shape our tools, but then the tools shape our expression. Notation tools shape what people are creating in terms of music. The availability of SMUFL fonts is going to change the music that's produced. People are going to be using more symbols because it is so much easier to do that, and the constraints go away, and people will not have to, oh my God, what font has this symbol? Oh, never mind, I'll just use something that's easier to do. People will be able to use these symbols more often, and I think we will be expanding what is in Common Western music notation because of SMUFL, and MusicXML needs to track that and facilitate that process. So I think that there's a lot of topics for discussion. I think we want to save that element of discussion generally and make sure we get plenty of time for MusicXML evolution. We're doing fine on time for that. So that's one motivation for what we want to do in MusicXML. Let's get SMUFL compatibility. That's at some level of additional glyphs at the very least. Probably also some things with tightening the specification, adding more information about font metadata. That's pretty obvious, but what else can we do? Well, there's a whole range of features and bug fixes and clarifications that we've discussed here at our meetings in the past, that we've discussed on the MusicXML forum. I have a very long list of things that people have suggested over the years, new ideas that come up as we see new applications, new use cases. And that new use cases really is the most interesting thing, I think, for how MusicXML could evolve. We really solved, to a large extent, the exchange part of MusicXML, and it's an archival format. But there's a lot more to do, and Joe will be discussing this in more detail, but I want to have a few slides to lead up and set up my perspective on the possibilities. MusicXML has really focused on the printed musical score as a reference for its data model, and that was a very deliberate design choice in MusicXML because of the context we were in when MusicXML development started. This was back in 2000, and there had been at least two major efforts to try to have a standard music notation format that had not succeeded at all. One was too graphical and didn't really represent semantics primarily. It was more a graphical format. Another took musical semantics and then abstracted it at a level to cover all music that was very difficult for any musician to really understand, and it was very complex. It seemed a way to break through the barriers of having all these different programs, having all their silos, and nobody could exchange with each other, was to have a common external reference so that you didn't have the thing that, oh, you're doing it that way because Finale does it that way, or you're doing it that way because Sibelius does it that way, or you're doing it because MuseData does it. Well, actually, we did do it the way MuseData did it. We used the academic starting formats as a starting point, MuseData and Humdrum. But it was easier to explain by having, it's a reference to a real physical object in the world, and you can understand it based on a model of the physical object. So you could make modeling, and we did, of course, make sure it was compatible both with the academic applications and with Finale and Sibelius, the most commonly used applications back in 2000 for doing music notation, make sure things were practical. And that was great then, but times have changed. As I mentioned, we've got basically everybody who is involved in the symbolic music space already uses MusicXML. We've got the document interchange. Getting better as the software matures. A big part of what's problematic in getting digital scores out to customers is how the music was engraved by an engraver, by a composer, by a publisher. In the past, it was very much to make it look good on paper, and not so much what the semantics were. And most publishers have been changing their processes over the past few years to really engrave to make sure things not only look right, but they play back right. They're using the semantic tools in the different notation applications the way they're meant so that they can export better to MusicXML and then transfer better to other applications. With the iPads in particular, we started seeing digital sheet music getting much more popular. So it's great to have this printed model that lets you go back and forth with high fidelity visually as well as semantically. But there's all sorts of interactive applications coming up that want to do reflow and many other things that go beyond having digital sheet music be a substitute for paper. And similarly, as the success has grown of the MusicXML format, there's more and more of a demand for better specification as there are more applications, there are more questions about the fine level of detail of what exactly things mean in the specification, and more need for a specification that provides more guidance to developers. But change can be hard, especially when you've had success in your initial use case. When I started MusicXML, I was always referencing back to MIDI and HTML. We needed MIDI to set a standard for the musical instrument, electronic musical instrument market before that could flourish. We needed HTML to have a standard for the web to flourish. We needed MusicXML to have a standard to make digital sheet music flourish. But MIDI and HTML were really successful. And starting with like MIDI 1.0 and HTML4, there were long periods of time where development basically stopped because it was so successful. It's great. We're done. Let's go home. But you're never done in technology. People, as you create the tools, people want to do new things with them. It opens up new possibilities. And if the technology doesn't evolve with the customers, with the users, then we get the people fragment. They come off and they split off and they do something else. They use totally different technology. And those transitions, MIDI is still trying to make the transition to a high definition protocol. HTML4 to HTML5 was a very long drawn out and rocky transition. Though it's looking pretty good now, more at the end point, but the process was pretty aggravating. So we want to keep MusicXML 3.0's abilities as an exchange and archival format, but we've got to add more than what we've done before, because times are different now than they were in the year 2000. One possibility is to have MusicXML be more of a reference for interactive applications. A lot of people have told us that a big benefit of MusicXML is that it serves as a reference for what do I need to cover? I'm trying to get into the area of digital sheet music in my application. What do I need to make sure to cover? I may do it a totally different way, but what are the things I need to think about to make sure I'm handling these situations properly? Maybe we can do the same thing for interactive applications. What are the common situations in interacting with digital sheet music that my application should handle, even if I don't implement it the way that MusicXML is handling it? So, can we do that? Can we add those capabilities while maintaining compatibility with MusicXML 3.0 and maintaining agreement between different vendors when you no longer have something external in the world as the reference point? You can say in MusicXML 3, hey, it's a score, it's done in reference to a score, the default Y is based on the top line of the staff. Default X is the left-hand side of the note. Here's what things look like in a printed score. A lot of what we need to support interactivity in MusicXML is capturing intent. Why is something being represented that way in the score? How is it being represented that way in a score? And that tends to be very different across applications, and there's no natural reference point to serve. These are not unsolvable problems by any means, but it's something different than what we've had to deal with before, and a challenge that we'll want to large companies, multinational companies, and that isn't the fit for a field where, you know, the giants of the industry have 5 or 10 developers, and that's a giant company for software development. But there are some new standards venues like W3C community groups that provide lighter weight processes, faster processes that don't necessarily have to be on consensus to avoid some of the pitfalls that we've seen in past standards organization efforts. So over the past year, we've explored, Joe Berkovitz and I have been exploring interest in the World Wide Web Consortium, in the MIDI Manufacturers Association, and in the IEC over the past year. And there's been interest in all these organizations in terms of MusicXML. I will now hand this over to Joe, but just as a thing for staying in touch, we have the MusicXML forums, different trade shows, our Twitter and Facebook page, there's my email address, and I'll hand it over to Joe for his discussion on MusicXML future evolution.
Thank you, Michael, for the very lucid and eloquent warm-up. Well, it's great to be here today. I've called my talk, yes, that will be handy. I called my talk Framing the Future because I think we're at a juncture, as Michael explained, where we have the opportunity to think, and the luxury to think about what we want MusicXML to become and what we think it might be able to do for us. I think MusicXML, as Michael said, is at a secure and safe place in its evolution in terms of its adoption. It's got great traction within the industry. So I want to talk about where we could take things. A little bit about me. Let's see. That's ahead. Who am I? Well, a few things that I do. I compose and play music. And I build notation software. NoFlight is the company that I started. And it's now owned by Hal Leonard, which is a major music publisher. So I feel privileged to have kind of seen the software vendor viewpoint and now being very heavily exposed to the publisher viewpoint from the inside. And another thing I do is work on web standards. I'm co-chair of the World Wide Web Consortium Web Audio Working Group, which is a standard relating to audio synthesis, also important for music, but not the subject of what I'm saying today. I want to talk about where MusicXML can go for here, and I'm going to talk about the case for evolution, why we might want it to evolve. I'm going to talk about maybe the type of paths we might pursue to help it evolve, and some of the choices in governance and approach that we could take. And let me talk about evolution from sort of the past to the present to the future. I want to talk about the history in a very brief way, not repeating what Michael has said. Talk about process a bit. Talk about the specification and the need for specification, how it can help us. Talk about some of the features that I think would help MusicXML and help all of us in the community. And talk about governance and how governance can advance whatever causes we feel are worthwhile in those areas. Well, history. So let's quickly skim through. This is sort of a restatement of many things Michael said. We started with exchanging and archiving as major goals with the MusicXML spec. And we had kind of a de facto steering by notation software vendors as the most interested and invested parties in the spec. At the time, digital music publishing outside of kind of image-based or you know paper mimicry type formats like PDF were really just a sideline or a twinkle in some people's eyes. And now, as we've seen, they're growing rapidly and they're becoming dominant. And at the time, of course, it was very important to create the conditions for MusicXML to succeed and take root and thrive. And so agility was important, and the ability to just quickly make decisions and adapt to industry conditions. And I think Michael has done an amazing job of steering the standard through that period and getting us to where we are now. But let's look at where we are now. And I'm going to talk about publishing, but my vantage point, of course, is more than just that of a publisher. Here's, I think, the way we all wish it worked. You get hold of some MusicXML files from some source, some content owner, or wherever you get them from, feed them into a compatible application that supports MusicXML, whatever that means. Everything looks great, and relax. Chillax. But, it's not really like that. It's a little more like this. You get hold of your MusicXML files. You discover that they use different subsets of MusicXML because it's so flexible. There's many different ways to express a musical concept. And there are many different options as far as the completeness with which those concepts need to be articulated in MusicXML. So you'll discover that some files do things some way, some files do things another way. You will also discover, probably many of you have, that engravers have done things in very divergent ways, which reveal themselves in very divergent representations within MusicXML. Even if the subsets are the same, the ways in which those subsets actually export can be very different and result in very different results in an application. And you'll find out that your renderer has certain expectations. Some renderers want presentation level information like X and Y coordinates. Some don't. Some will respect them, some will not. And if your score is represented or is intended to be presented in multiple end user environments like paper, desktop, mobile this way, mobile that way, you as a content owner or creator have no way to actually specify how your scores should look in these diverse environments. You've really only got one set of visual information, which is the information injected into the original document. So maybe you'll now have another drink, maybe the same drink, but your mood will be different. You will not be relaxing. So, and for developers, it's no easier for all the same reasons. So, what can we do? A lot of historical goals have been met, but clearly we've got some other goals that we can clarify and try to address. Today, it is possible to successfully publish documents in MusicXML and render them, but it requires a lot of care and feeding, as we saw a couple of slides ago, at many different steps of the chain, starting with the engraving and going all the way through the process. A great deal of care and validation and tweaking and massaging. It's very, very hard to do right now. And yet, it's not, I don't think it's the fault of MusicXML. I don't think that the standard is busted. I think that the standard is very expressive and very powerful. And what we need to do is identify the problems and find out how to refine the standard, refine the way we use it, refine the way we understand it, because that's an issue too. And then try and pursue the path that will work for us. I don't pretend to know what that path is, but I want to talk about how we might be able to get to it. I think we have to identify who are the stakeholders in MusicXML. I mean, I think we all know roughly what that slate looks like, but that is an initial important step. We have to get a group together. I think many of those roles are represented here today, but are all of them? I don't know. We have to develop a document that clearly identifies what we want to do with MusicXML. What are the use cases that will matter? What will we promise people who adopt the specification? And we need to figure out which use cases are not well served today. And then we can identify the features that would unlock and serve those use cases better. Here's my rough list. I'm not going to say it's complete, but I want to include a few key things. Well, of course, we've got editor, import, export. We have music publishing. I think we've always had those from the beginning. We have now an increasing number of reader and performance evaluation systems, both on desktop and mobile. We have non-editor notation apps like interactive theory drills or quizzes where you can, click on bits of a score or cause scores to be created on the fly by responding to some UI. We have scholarly and specialist publications. We have in-house publishing, libraries and archival services, and also permeating all these things, we have an increasing convergence between web and print and EPUB technologies that's really shaking up the whole world of textual publishing and engineering publishing. And I think that's going to wind up affecting music publishing at least as much. So, having figured out those use cases, I think we must also develop a spec. And MusicXML really needs one. It's great that we have a complete XSD, that XML schema, that does a good job of describing the elements and attributes and abstract types in detail. But we have a lot of features in MusicXML. It's very rich. A lot of them are optional, and it leaves a lot of room for developers, both who are consuming and emitting MusicXML, to make their own decisions about, well, I'll emit this, I'll consume that. It's really hard to tell what one should expect. What should one be required to put in a MusicXML document for a specific purpose? And if you consume it for some purpose, what should you expect to find? It's really hard to be sure. Today, you've got to pretty much grab a whole bunch of documents and look at them and analyze them and try to figure it out. So I think a very important aspect of any specification would be feature profiles. And this is the idea of just identifying specific subsets of the specification, of the standard, that serve specific purposes. We also need a specification that makes testable statements about conformance, so we know when you are actually supporting MusicXML. And this has to do with mapping between semantic constructs and some sort of minimal understanding of what that means for presentation. So, as an example, we might make a statement in the specification that note heads that occur at the same time are going to be horizontally aligned in some way understood to be very standardized. I think that's not very controversial, but we don't say that anywhere. Or we might talk about what above and below really mean in terms of text placement when there are no coordinates in play. Today, all these decisions are made ad hoc by developers, and I think a specification would really help us kind of agree on what the behavior should be, or what the range of acceptable behaviors should be. This doesn't mean we're going to wind up in a place where we effectively mandate a kind of PDF-like slavish set of engraving rules, but we do need to have some agreement on what's acceptable and what's not. Aside from the need for a spec, I want to talk about some likely areas where we could evolve the power and the capabilities of MusicXML. So these would be new features or new layers of information that could be employed. One of the key ones, and I'm going to spend a few more slides on this in a second, so I'll go fast here, is flexible styling and layout. I mentioned before that MusicXML, if you want it to be seen on multiple devices, it's pretty tough to express that in a MusicXML document because of its antecedents in print. And HTML and SVG graphics and a number of other web-based specs over time have evolved a style sheet-based approach that's extremely expressive, extremely powerful. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. Another area where we could see some very helpful improvement is syntactic validation of valid semantics. Today, to determine the semantic validity of a MusicXML document, like, does a slur actually begin and end, for instance, you have to scan the document and look for the beginning and look for the end and match number attributes and so forth. And now you have the need for sanitizers, such as the one being developed by Neoscores. And building these things is very complicated. And I think all of us who have built MusicXML ingestion code wind up duplicating that work in one way or another of kind of figuring out how to validate what's coming in the door. And you can't do it purely syntactically today. You have to kind of build a dictionary of everything you're seeing. Metadata vocabularies is another area where I think MusicXML can include some metadata, but there's been a lot of advances in thinking about how to tag and categorize and label documents. That would be useful. As Michael mentioned, manipulation, interactivity, and selection. We're seeing a lot of people build applications with musical documents that are not simply editors and they're not simply viewers, where there's some interaction that's accomplishing some purpose that's pretty custom and unique to that application. And MusicXML can be a great substrate for building these applications, I think, and I'm also going to talk about that. Playback. Many applications today with MusicXML incorporate some type of playback. Can we think about having a standardized API for talking to a MusicXML document and asking it to play itself in various ways or in various ranges? Graphics and hypertext inclusion. This goes a little bit beyond the very, very valuable contributions that Smoofle is going to make to MusicXML by understanding that actually there is no real limit to what composers will put in scores. Composers are constantly pushing the boundaries, and we need some kind of escape valve other than lines and stuff to allow arbitrary graphics to be included in scores. And it would be great to see a stable, relatively future-proof way to do that. Anchors and pointers. This is the way that web documents refer to each other or refer to pieces of each other. And that's a very valuable thing to be able to do with music. Imagine being able to follow a link into a score that not only takes you to a view of that score, but takes you to a specific range of it or a specific bar of it. And these are the kinds of things we could be doing and representing with MusicXML if we decide how that should work. Annotations, Michael mentioned, there is now a web annotation spec. And of course, that's of great interest to the scholarly community, the educational community, archival communities, and accessibility. We haven't really figured that out well anywhere, but that's also an area that is very important, that if we can figure out a way to accommodate in MusicXML, it'll be really good. So let me now dive briefly on an imaginary implementation of style sheets within MusicXML that need not be disruptive to the structure of a MusicXML document, but might afford publishers and consumers some much needed flexibility in how documents look. And this is all imaginary. I'm not pushing this as the way we should do it. This is an illustration of the kind of extension to the spec that we might be able to accomplish if we're willing to look at how to evolve it. What is a style sheet? A style sheet is a separate document from, it's separate from a semantic document, and it describes how things look. And you can possibly have more than one style sheet for a given document. And this is a very powerful thing because it allows you to tailor the exact same document to different contexts, different devices, different viewing characteristics, possibly not even visual renderings, but braille renderings or purely audible renderings. And the idea is, instead of mixing presentation and semantic markup in the same document, You just keep them apart. You make your documents largely semantic, and you have an accompanying style sheet that explains, hey, here's how this kind of element looks. Here's how that kind of element looks. You then have style attributes that are injected into the semantic document that say, for instance, maybe this note is an alternate reading note. Well, how does an alternate reading note look? You can look at the style sheet to figure that out. Now you've got a document that says what the engraver meant instead of capturing the exact way the engraver made it look at the time. And that's a very, very useful thing from both a publisher's standpoint and a consumer standpoint. And let's look at how that might look. I don't know if people, can anybody read that? Yeah, I will send out, or Michael, we have a way to post this somewhere. I hope, yeah. I hope we'll post all the slides. Great. So, you know, what we have here is an imaginary style sheet. This is the same format that is used for web documents, but it's highly adaptable. It's also used for scalable vector graphics and other formats. And this is an imaginary application of the style sheet, the CSS concept, to MusicXML. So here we have at the type, this is a style sheet for maybe a paper style presentation of the score where we say, okay, the title is going to be positioned absolutely at the top, 120 pixels below the top, and centered, horizontally centered. We then have an imaginary hypothetical declaration saying dot part. Every part element is going to use a staff line spacing of 6 pixels between the staff lines. So that's of course, setting the overall font size for the music. Dot measure, actually, you know, there's an error here that there should be no dots there. It should just say part and measure. Measure, the measure declaration might say, here are the standard duration spacings in staff lines to use for horizontal layout, how to map durations to horizontal space by default. Obviously, many applications will fine-tune those spacings in a lot of ways, but this is just an example of the kind of expressive information that could be, hypothetically, in a style sheet. Direction.tempo, you know, where should a tempo direction go? Well, it should, and how should it look? In our imaginary style sheet language, we can say it should be 2 lines above the staff, 15 pixel font size, bold. Maybe you wanted to say the font, I'm sure, as well. And finally, the example I began talking about at the beginning, if we have, say, an alternate reading style for a note, and we might say in this style sheet, that means the note is half its usual size. These are the kinds of presentation decisions that can be captured in a separate file. And the point of that is that you wind up with MusicXML that looks kind of like this. It's devoid of presentation information. It becomes almost pure semantics. And you don't have any more this mixture of kind of visual frosting. You just have the cake. And the big benefit is that you can have a different style sheet for a different purpose. Here's a mobile style sheet that makes different presentation decisions about the same document. So now it says credit.title display none. That means don't show it. Because in our mobile app, maybe we're having some kind of scrollable strip and the title is not part of the rendering at all, so we don't want to see it. The staff line spacing for the part is changed to 8 pixels because we want this score to be shown bigger on our imaginary mobile device. And we've changed the alternate reading style because we don't want perhaps little tiny notes if we're not printing at a high resolution. Instead, here we've decided that we'll use a gray note instead of a black note to represent the alternate reading. So this is a very powerful thing. We're allowed to choose how we want something to look independently of what it is. And this has been one of the most successful innovations in HTML in the last decade. And it's become the foundation of building websites that adapt in an intelligent way to whether they're on the desktop or on a phone or on a tablet, what have you. Going one step further, I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's going to get lengthy. There's a style of programming based on using style sheet attributes that allows you to very easily create interactive applications on the web using simple scripting to listen for events that occur when users interact with an object, like clicking, and responding to those events by perhaps changing the visual style of elements in a document. Now we're talking about a live document that gets changed on the fly. And if you take the approach that's used in HTML for clicking on things like paragraphs or little buttons or what have you, and simply transfer that to the entities you find in MusicXML, like notes and measures, you can very quickly use these scripting constructs to build useful interactivity. I'm not going to walk through this whole thing, you can read it later, but the idea here is very simple script to highlight the last note clicked in a green color and de-highlight whatever one was highlighted before. That's not a very interesting app, but I want to illustrate the economy with which this kind of approach can let a developer express that. Again, independently of the document and maybe independently of the rendering technology, because this kind of scripting extends today across all web browsers. Why could it not perhaps extend across all music renderers? Or at least those which want to support interactivity. Okay, so that's sort of my little excursion into possible concrete realities that could be, but I want to go back to talking about the process and the possibilities. I think, and it's just an opinion, and this is an opportunity to gather lots of people's opinions, that the best way forward would be to move the MusicXML spec to a consortium-based ownership and governance. And I want to say why I think that's a good idea, because we of course have the option of continuing as is. Michael's doing a great job. Make Music cares about the spec and respects openness and it isn't getting in anybody's way. It's not that something's wrong, it's that things could be better. One of the things that could be better is we do need a clear specification for the reasons that I outlined. And if we enter a standards track process in some consortium, there's no way to really continue down that track without having a formal spec. It's going to force us to do it. And I think that forcing function is a good thing, and I think it's needed for the good of the specification, for the good of the standard. I also think consortium ownership assures openness and fairness. It's not that we don't have openness and fairness now, but there's a time scale, as Michael said, to stable consortiums. And I happen to think the W3C is among the most stable and most long-lived that we've had. The membership of a standard organization supplies some diverse and fresh viewpoints, maybe from outside this community, that would be welcome. Leadership supplies continuity and domain expertise. I'm pointing at Michael. And the consortium machinery itself supplies expertise in adjacent areas. So if we decide that we want support for style sheets, that it's useful to us, in the W3C consortium, for one, we can go to the author of the CSS spec and say, please help us. You figured it out for HTML, you figured it out for vector graphics. Help us figure it out for music. What would that mean? You know a lot about CSS, help us. And we can do that in many different areas of the spec where we need help. Of course, if you haven't already thought about compatibility, hopefully you will now. It's always a struggle to maintain compatibility, and Michael's done a great job of assuring it so far. And my goal in any evolution that I foresee would be to preserve as much of it as possible. I don't know if we can really have 100% compatibility at the document level, but there are things we could do to mitigate those changes that we feel deliver value that justifies them. First of all, it's much easier to migrate MusicXML over some MusicXML change than to start all over again with a new standard that takes its place, that has different roots. And I want to maintain the roots we have and that we've invested in. I think we always need to have a very well-defined mapping across any kind of migration that changes the syntax or changes the way a concept is expressed. And we obviously need tooling for doing that so that it's very, very clear, and the code for making such changes is very available for moving back and forth. If there's any change in the format, I don't know that there needs to be, but we may need to contemplate it. We need to make that migration as painless as possible. It is doable. As Michael said, the change from HTML4 to HTML5 was not easy, but it was accomplished. And had it not been accomplished, HTML4 would have really struggled and been in a bad spot. I want to talk about a few adjacent standards that kind of have a bearing on things we might do in MusicXML. I talked about cascading style sheets, or CSS. Scalable vector graphics is another interesting and useful one to look at. It's of course for vector graphics. It was developed originally by Adobe and then became a W3C standard. So interestingly, SVG kind of followed the private to consortium ownership path. And in so doing, it became harmonized with web standards in some very useful ways. And I think there's some good examples there to follow. Governance too, but I think we can do much of what we need to do with MusicXML regardless. HTML, of course, MIDI, EPUB, and there are lots of others, I'm sure. So I'm almost at the end here. I want to talk a little bit about some of the different consortium choices that we might consider if we think this is a good idea. As is probably clear, I think W3C is a great choice as I've gotten to know it better through my own involvement with it. A lot of the adjacent specifications that I just mentioned are in the W3C arena. And so through W3C, we get access to the people who wrote them and who know all about how they work and how those lessons could be applied. They also have great technical support for building specs and seeing them through the process. And when you write a spec using their machinery, it takes a lot of the drudge work off of one. There's a lot of automatic formatting and linkage. Like if you're talking about an element, you can just name it, and they've got tools that sort of figure out, oh, this should be a link back to the definition of that term. There's a lot of automated machinery now that makes writing specs easier than it used to be. And I think W3C has a proven ability to adapt even through some difficult and rough transitions like the HTML5 one. MMA is another important consortium. They are custodian of the MIDI spec, of course, which is undergoing its own evolution after a long, long time. And it's a singular spec. I think MMA is more focused on a single domain, but they certainly are tangent to MusicXML because of the musical focus. And EPUB is another set of standards that are very important, obviously, in the publishing world. And I think EPUB is an important thing to watch and look at because it's evolving quickly it's understood that EPUB has really not done a great job with certain types of certain domain areas. It hasn't done well with visual arts. It hasn't done well with engineering, notation, science, technology, so forth. And I think music can learn from and possibly harmonize with some of the changes that are going on in EPUB. So let me close with sort of a summary of what I think would be great for MusicXML. I think it would be good to form a W3C community group with Michael Good in a leadership role. And let me say a little bit about what a community group is. A community group is an entry point to the process of making a standard into a sort of full-blown, fully blessed recommendation, which is the term that W3C uses for things like, things that are accepted and understood to be the standard. They've been agreed on, they've gone through a consensus process. So CGs are very loose, there's no membership fee, it can be structured any way that we feel that it should be structured, but they are the initial step on a track that eventually leads into a more formal standards process. And so that is something to be conscious of. But I think that being on that track is part of what creates the momentum to evolve and address some of the issues that I've talked about today. As a first step, I think that community group could immediately publish the current revision of MusicXML, whatever it is, 3, 4. I think it's really just a step to assert, okay, whatever MusicXML today is now coming out of this community group, and it's under the governance of W3C, and we'll take it from here in that community group. We can then begin the work that I described earlier, identifying use cases, needs, features, begin to work on a specification, understand what that would look like, recruit some of the best musical experts and experts in adjacent technologies too. And down the road, we would be moving towards a structure in which there's a W3C working group similar to the ones that have worked on HTML, SVG, web audio, et cetera, et cetera. And I would hope that many of us would be taking part in that. And ultimately, the goal is to get to what is called, as I said, recommendation, which is, here's the standard, this is how it works now. So, I'm going to open the floor in a second, or I'll ask Michael to open things up for discussion. But here are some questions I have that I hope we'll talk about now. Do people feel that this proposal is worth further consideration? And I think that this question isn't really asking anyone to assert, yeah, this is it. It's more about, is there something here that's worth moving on and figuring out? Are there ways you want to see MusicXML evolve for your own purposes? Do you want to be a stakeholder that's directly involved in owning that evolution? Do you want to be represented by one? Would consortium ownership be a good idea from your point of view? And do you think that W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, could be a good host for this process? Would something else be better? Anyway, I want to leave you with these questions and hope we can move to some interesting discussion of them. And I thank you so much for your time and attention. You can reach me at joe@nodeflight.com if you want. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joe. I'd like to leave this slide up because I think it provides a great framework for the discussion. Just like to get people's opinions on any or all of these questions, and we can either be speaking loudly or we can pass the mic around, whatever works best as we figure it out. I will be taking notes here to record and put together into a report that we'll publish on the MusicXML blog through our social media. Oh, come on, people in this room have opinions. You know they do. Oh.
One of the topics that has not been discussed so much, and I don't know if it's MusicXML or the usage of MusicXML, I'm not really a specialist, is the MusicXML as a tool to analyze music. There's, I think, a lot to learn from the linguistics scientific area, where you can compare texts very fast and find all changes or semantic similarities and so on. And when it comes to music, I know from the music field there is a need to know all changes from one version to another, or to know what is the essence of well, whatever composer or something. So is this a topic that is crossing your mind too?
It crossed my mind, although I think I didn't do a good job of articulating it. I think you said it much better. But yes, informatics and the analysis of musical documents, I think it's very important. It should be in that list of use cases that are considered.
There are already at least a couple of applications that are doing this. The Music 21 toolkit at MIT. There's another program whose name I'm blanking out on in Australia that does this type of work. But yeah, it's certainly an area that could. There are features in MusicXML that were designed for this, but they haven't really been used all that much. And part of the way the MusicXML process has been in the past is that I try to reach out to, like with metadata, for MusicXML 3.0, I tried to reach out to the MusicXML librarian community, other communities to see, because there had been an interest, we should improve the metadata in MusicXML. Reached out to communities, see if there was interest in developing that, but I wasn't able to get people to be interested in working on it. What we want for any of these new areas, I think it's a great principle going forward, and what we've done for major new features, we develop the features together with an implementation. We try not to create features on spec and then hope that they work later in an implementation. We've done that in some features, and sometimes that's worked out and sometimes not so well. So key to any of these new areas is that we have enough people to work on it, that we have at least one or two people who are willing to implement it during the development cycle, and we can really focus on that and grow the technologies. But yeah, I think it'd be a great area for growth. And if people could introduce themselves and names and companies for folks who don't know each other.
I also like your idea how we could start the process of initiating this standardization process. The question, we also said that we have here a group of pretty small companies here. So they're not Microsoft sitting here. And so my question is, do you have some idea in mind how this how the financial how this process could be supported financially to start up to build up a committee that is a community that's really able to actively work on this standardization process?
Well, I think that there's a strong incentive to do it because it's a matter of survival. And the actual cost in terms of, are you talking about the cost of the effort or the cost of belonging to an organization?
Well, it's as you know, most of the here in this room, for the most time they do other work, so they need to be there needs to be the possibility to have people which are very intensively working on this standardization.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's easier for a large company to find these people and really have them actively working. I think that we have different communities. I'm not sure whether this can be implemented as easily as it could be for a large company. So
well, there are some larger companies that are willing to definitely invest in this process. I belong to one of them. I'm not referring to Notify, of course, but to Helen. And I think it's just an imperative. If we don't do it, then we will see our standard languish and fail to evolve. And I think that we need to find ways to engage together to share the work, because if we don't do that, it will be too much for any one organization, resources or not. So I don't think it is easy. No, I'm not trying to whitewash the effort level, but I also think that if we don't do it, we're kind of going to remain in limbo indefinitely. That's my concern.
I'm Bob from Neoscourse. We strongly support the idea of this technology, the PC entry point, and also the CNS proposal, which is also coming really close to what we are already doing. So, if you want to collaborate with it, we are already doing it as a daytime job because it's a matter of products. So we only need to share our thoughts with the rest of you, and then we have to come up with this general average of all the ideas. So it's not a matter of investing time in it, it's the time we're already spending on it. We should just collaborate with each other, I think. So I'm strongly supporting this idea.
Just to amplify on something Bob said that's interesting, I think that many of us may have already implemented something like style sheets, because if you work with a publisher and they want things to look a certain way, you're going to have to come up with some way of expressing that. Why not let them express it directly?
There must be more opinions here on this topic. Christoph, the other guy was thinking of him.
Christoph from Microsoft, he was store editor. I have no expertise at all. Questions, not too much. I'm a developer with technical ideas and musician. So it sounds reasonable. I think it's good to have it brought to a more neutral and more widely backed organization. So I expect more dynamics in this. What I have a topic which I brought up 2 years ago. Not the documentation that that could be improved still, but the vector mapping of notation concepts that a music notation program has into the language. We talked about this very specific idea of having user-defined directions, movements. This notion of why is this step up or down? Is it just by algorithm, or is it one user decided to play it? When you are taking new directions and interactive applications, and then music and the score will be much more ways transformed, and it will be pressed together. It will be subjected to changes in the CSS, and so the need for more semantic layout information is now really urgent. And I think this way, adding things that are more on the level of the algorithms. How do I, as a program, control my algorithm to get this result, rather than how is the result itself? So, did I want to go a step up? How is the Y of a measure controlled just 20% wider, or so? This is not possible at the moment. And so measure x1, x2 is almost worthless now. It's if you it's just rebuilding this optical appearance, but nothing more.
I think that's absolutely correct. With to move toward more interactive, as we move from the paper substitutes to more interactive applications, you've got to encode the Y. I mean, otherwise you're reverse engineering it, and good luck with that. Right? It's very difficult. Following up on that, I think it might be helpful for me to say my perspective on where Make Music stands in this issue. of governance. First of all, I sold my company, I sold Recordare to make music 3 years ago. So part of the price for selling your company to another company, as Joel knows too, is that you lose the ultimate say in things. I am not the one who makes the decision on whether or not Make Music would be willing to transfer MusicXML into another standards organization. I have strong influence on the people who do make that decision, but I'm not the one who actually makes that decision. From the Make Music perspective, there are really two competing interests. One is that, the common interest across everybody is that the standard must evolve. It must keep moving. If it doesn't evolve to meet needs of the market, it's big trouble for us. It's big trouble for the whole community. It's big trouble for Make Music. MusicXML is probably more strategic than ever for Make Music, both for features that we want to add to the Finale notation editor that we want to be able to have our customers export to whatever digital sheet music application they want, and for our own needs in bringing repertoire into our smart music program. So there are MusicXML is key to that, and if we see that we need for the Finale 2016 release, should that be what our next release is called, there are no product commitments in here at all, just using examples of possibilities. If we say, as we mentioned, we're working on a Maestro, a Smoofle version of Maestro. So, hey, say we want to release that as part of the next version of Finale, we definitely want to have MusicXML supporting many, many more Smoofle glyphs. That's got to be done by a particular time in the product cycle. We don't want it to go down a path that's going to slow down that delivery date, miss our delivery date, miss the product. Eventually that need becomes less and less. I'm not sure where it is now. I suspect that the easiest thing for Make Music, this is just a suspicion, is we do an iteration of MusicXML 4.0 in the current governance, really working on these issues of encoding the Ys, adding Smoofle support, getting more of this type of functionality in. Do we go all the way to full CSS styling in timeframes that we want? Maybe, maybe not, probably not. We can certainly be thinking about it though, discussing things, making sure that we don't add things that take us away from that path. And then when we have MusicXML 4.0 done, hopefully by that point, Steinberg would be further along on their path, more comfortable with the possibility of donating Smoofle to the same organization, because I think it's a lot easier for me to sell my management on donating Make Music, donating Make Music. That is not going to happen. There is no way that is going to happen. Donating MusicXML to a consortium like W3C, if I can say, hey, Steinberg is donating Smoofle. It's probably easier for Daniel to make the case and say, hey, Make Music's donating MusicXML, we can donate Smoofle. It's, having that it's not just the company being altruistic, but that multiple companies are coming together, contributing technology for the growth of the overall market, which is good for all the companies. And just thinking of the practical situation, it may be that we do a MusicXML 4.0, and we could be doing it in a simultaneous fashion, working on MusicXML 4.0 and also working on the logistics of transference to a governance group. But in either case, yeah, getting the why of the semantics into the next version, I think is crucial.
So, this is Reinhard Hoffmann from Location Software. And I just want to support what you just said. We have here a group of people, of some gentlemen from big companies like you guys on the front, and many people here from very small companies. And as you saw from the very beginning of the list, those small companies evolve even more. So from the needs of a small company, I would, from my perspective, hire a few guys, give them the spec, do it. And just to do some kind of a re-engineering or stepping or investigation, how it works, or maybe take a Finale product, how to do this this is simply not affordable for small companies. Therefore, I think the big companies have to have some kind of a leading role pushing that forward, similar as we did Mike with Make Music so far. And I can say, from our perspective as a small company, we want to support that. Our financial restriction, we are somehow limited, but clearly, in order to make this protocol successful going forward in the future, there needs to be a standard environment, community, consortium, or whatever for that driving that forward. Otherwise, it will not survive long term. And from that perspective, I do not see anything better on the market right now as MusicXML is. So I fully support that standardization push going forward, but the funding and support need to be somehow that the big companies contribute more than the others, but because simply we don't have the financial possibility. So in a nutshell, yes, strongly support that going forward and evolve the plan over time.
Thanks very much, Reinhold. I have maybe a clarification question for Joe on how you may envision this working. With the W3C community groups, the financial impact isn't there. There is no membership fee. You can join. It's the financial impact is that you're spending your time on the stand, but that happens whether you're contributing to the MusicXML forum or if you're contributing to MusicXML and its development. It doesn't matter what the governance is between a community group and the way we have things now. I think the interesting question is what happens down the road in terms of a standards effort where then you would have to become a W3C member. I mean, yes, there are invited experts in W3C consortiums, but somebody's got to pay for that expertise in the standards organization, and that comes from membership fees. I don't think W3C would be that interested in something that has 3 members and 50 invited experts. That probably isn't the...
No, but there is a sliding scale.
Mm-hmm.
Reinhold, you make a very good point, and I have a response. It's not a counter argument, just a different angle on things. Before my company was part of a larger company, we were a tiny bootstrap startup for some years, and we found it very worthwhile to participate as we could, as we found the time in certain standards efforts, because the return on that participation to our business was very substantial in that we were able to state what was necessary for the survival of our business and then see it take root and actually occur and be implemented by others. So there's a certain kind of leveraged aspect to working on standards that's quite exciting and rewarding when it comes to be. And this doesn't mitigate anything you said, but there's sort of a plus side of the ledger too for small companies.
Martin Barris from Nutcraft Music Engravers in the Boston area. To answer your first question, yes, this proposal is obviously worth enthusiastic consideration. In terms of how we'd like to see MusicXML evolve, Joe mentioned 2 of the strongest ones for us. One of them would be the validation of the code. Bob's software can help with that, but if there was some way that it was the standard was formalized, obviously the validation will be formalized too, or written down. It's clean at the start. We've been involved in music file conversions of one kind or another for about 25 years now. It's amazing how many things can go wrong. The other thing I'm really intrigued about is CSS. Sort of make my head explode when I start thinking about it. But I'm wondering to what extent a notion that will develop text and graphics and that works very well for that and been so successful would work for music. How easy is it to separate the content from that?
on the CSS perspective, it's fairly new to me to be thinking about that as well. For MusicXML 1.0, it really was a deliberate decision. I mean, it wasn't, at the time of MusicXML 1.0, 0.1, everybody was advocating separation of concerns, that you separate the logical semantics from the visual, from the playback. This was a very common idea. I was very familiar with it at the time. And my design was to not do that, to really combine the two together, especially visual and semantics, because it's very difficult to separate the two. The visual really is a representation of the semantics, and you have, because of the reasons you stated, it's difficult to do these things. There's, I think, certainly an element in CSS stylings that could be used. I mean, the things that are in the appearance element in MusicXML, for instance, well, that should be box simple to move to CSS. But can we, I haven't been thinking through this, but can we get to that encoding of the Y's? The encoding of the Y is more important to me than the particular CSS example. As Joe mentioned, CSS is just an example of the way things can evolve. It's not, oh, we've got to do it this way. I think it's a great topic for discussion. I'm wondering, because I haven't heard anything about the very last question that Joe has on the list about would another consortium be better? What I'm hearing is somewhat sounding like consensus about the W3C community group activity. Please don't, not say anything and then say, oh, that wasn't consensus. That was, if you think that another consortium would be better, if MMA would be better, if some other organization you think would be better, if you think that a consortium is not a good idea, obviously we have to manage the financial aspects going from, should there be a move from a community group to a full recommendation, there are financial issues there. But if there are concerns along the lines of moving to a consortium, please let us know now.
Don't hold back.
Yeah,
Hi, I'm Robert Pichot, independent font and software. So yeah, to go back to CSS, that's a very interesting new idea. But I have several questions about it. What would be the benefit of having, this idea, this CSS idea, for me is, maybe I'm wrong, you tell me, is equivalent to have some engraving settings or recommendations on symbolic contents music. So how do I want to this particular music to go? On the other hand, CSS to me is a way to beautify an existing incarnated web page, the origin. So it's not a symbolic content, it's already a content, it's already a visual content. So I would perhaps suggest to, rather than to have a separate file, separate format, whether it's CSS or JSON or whatever, to provide with those engraving settings on a symbolic music content, is to include those settings within the MusicXML format itself as new tags.
Yes, and actually HTML allows that too.
Exactly.
You can mix, and I think I don't want my example to be taken too literally. It's sort of a suggestion or an illustration, but as you say, one has the full range of choice with CSS. You can have a separate file. You can have the file included in the MusicXML document, or you can scatter all the presentation information throughout the document. All of those are open options.
And I think that in that case, where everything would be in the same format and file, it would be easier to override sometimes the settings. It would be clearer for for the not for the machine, but for.
I think the discussions of CSS are, that could go a very long time, so we could start it at the reception and perhaps continue it online. I want to make sure that James and other folks have, we're getting about 10 minutes to the reception, so.
James Sutton, Dolphin. I just wondered if we were going to talk about the MusicXML4 and detailed additions.
I'm sorry?
I wondered if we were going to discuss about MusicXML4 and the additions we need to make for that.
I wasn't planning to be discussing beyond these general concepts of evolution of the format, the removal, and change of governance, because that really is setting more the context of how a MusicXML4 provides. I mean, it's very important, I think, to know where the community stands in terms of governance and interest in interactivity elements. For instance, we've gotten the feedback about the need to encode the Ys. That's a CSS or some other way. That's important. Smoothle is important. Is there a particular feature that you want to make sure we discuss? And
yes, I think there's worrying thing particularly, but it's direction type words. There is no semantic information included in that. So if you put temporal information or dynamics or articulation, they all need to be laid out in different places and in different fonts. And the dynamics, for instance, all need to be lined up with the wedges and things like that. There's no information about that in the direction type. It's just means text. And so I don't know what to do with it when I get this direction text. Where to put it.
yeah, I think that's a great idea for how we can, again, encode more semantics into MusicXML. It's not just a matter of the Y for an engraving decision, but for something that's more general purpose in MusicXML now, like the words element. What is the semantic connection? Right now, you have the ability to, there are some playback elements that could be associated with it, but that's not the same thing. You want more of a taxonomic approach of here or some descriptive approach about what the semantics are associated with the words element. I don't think we will solve that here, but it certainly seems to be resonating with a theme that is around the room, and definitely capture that for this report. Bernd?
Yes, Bernd Jungmann from Capella Software. And the question about changing governance, you asked about other organizations which might be candidates for being the central point for MusicXML. And we have had some experience with the MPEG group, at least 5 years, maybe 6 years ago. And all what happened there was some travel expenses and some, discussions about details, but we didn't achieve anything. So I'm a little bit suspicious about changing governance. I have no personal experience with W3C as you have. This is quite an important question, I would stress. You must know a little bit about the internals of an organization like that to be able to give a recommendation that we should go there. I have no means I don't know anything about it. I know, W3C is a good thing, okay, but not more. So there are questions for me. Will the travel expenses rise? Well, I have never gone to the Californian twin meeting of this meeting because it was too far away for me. So if we go to W3C, will there occur some necessity to go there? Well, wouldn't like that. And any change in governance always requires some efforts. You have to set up new websites and make this and that, and then any change is of course also expensive in some kind. It requires time and effort. And it's very nice to have MusicXML in a workable state, so as it is now. And this is for me really important, I think. But will it be better under W3C, or will it only be more expensive? This is the question I cannot really answer, but I think it's an interesting question.
It's certainly a question that I think we should feel satisfied with the answer to. And I think I have focused a great deal today on sort of the case for changing in change in governance to an organization that would kind of meet those requirements, but I haven't really made the case about what kind of organization W3C is, and I think that's something perhaps left to do. But I can say that W3C is a very different kind of organization from MPEG. It's a much more agile organization, and it is focused on software specs and that need to evolve quite rapidly in many cases. And there's rotating geographic locations, and in any case, a community group would happen when and where the leadership of the group decides to have it, just like today. I think it would not be the similar situation in the community from what we have today during that phase.
How often do face-to-face meetings happen? I mean, the working groups. Is that on a
the working groups usually meet, so once you are a working group, there's usually a couple of face-to-faces, and they're in diverse, they try to arrange diverse locations. That's not always in California or Boston or anything.
and not everybody attends every face-to-face.
Not everybody attends, and most work honestly is done remotely, just as we do here. Yeah.
So it is sounding fairly similar in that, I mean, we could have as long as MusicMesse still provides this venue, MusicMesse is totally changing next year, so who only knows if this venue will be here again next year. I certainly hope so. But that, we could still have, MusicMesse is the place for face-to-face. I mean, the audio group has done, one of the, Daro has done work with the IEC, another of the big capital S governmental standards organizations. It's possible we could have a path, if we're in a W3C community group, that the MIDI Manufacturers Association has expressed interest in co-publishing standard that the W3C community group provides, or community report. IEC has in the past co-published published standards from the MIDI Manufacturers Association and the W3C, and has expressed interest in the music notation area about publishing results that are produced by these different groups. So we might even be able to pull off the ability to have a more official worldwide standard for some of the benefits that offers, especially in Asian markets, without the cost. I mean, I was in that MPEG process too. That was a total disaster. I mean, that was